We're going to be discussing the idea of the false binary.
What an illusion of choice does, it establishes the baseline assumptions that nobody questions.
This is part of the fifth generation warfare that we've talked about. Voting for the lesser of two evils. It's definitely an emotional, psychological trap that people are in.
You're cheerleading for an insane ideology because you think you're winning.
The role we have as media, how do we help everybody understand this is theater and you need to get back into the real world?
If you're opposed to the agenda, you should oppose it regardless of who's selling it to you.
You're muted, Ryan.
Oh, fantastic. Welcome back to the Independent Media Alliance. We have a great panel set up for you today. We recently had a really great conversation centered around digital ID, which, as we've all kind of expressed, is like this is the, as I put it, the connective tissue between where we are and where we're all being driven. And it was a really great in-depth conversation, really defining, really discussing where our lines need to be drawn and a lot of other things. As we know, digital ID being only one part of the control grid discussion. And so today what we're focusing on is Catherine's Solari report overview entitled Trump Administration Digital Control Grid Coming Together at High Speed. And we've discussed this more than once. What we're planning and what we've been doing is kind of touching base every month, every so many weeks to discuss the different steps that have been taken, where it's going, and what we see happening in general. So I'll just go ahead and put our names up so everyone knows who we are, and let's just go ahead and get started. Catherine, if you want to kick us off with that post and set the table for us.
Also muted, Catherine.
Great start today, guys.
So you beat it into us, Ryan. We were supposed to mute.
My fault.
We started off the year with the new administration coming out and pushing digital control very aggressively. So it started literally with the first day and the announcement of Stargate, and went on from there as the Genius Act started to be passed, which finally passed this summer, that converted the push for programmable money through CBDC to stable coins and set up the pipeline to a social credit system, while we watch Palantir and other government contractors literally collecting up and privatizing an enormous amount of data. And so the number of steps the administration was taking to aggressively build a control grid was so amazing. We started to just write a collection and update it every week, because there's several different moving parts to this. And I gave you a picture to kind of help you understand the different areas. So the digital ID, as you pointed out when we started, is at the very heart, because you need a very high quality digital ID for internal control within a country. We have passports to go across internationally, but you need a digital ID. And of course, the real ID has been being pushed now through the DMVs, but started with the Patriot Act and pushed ever since. And now they're really trying to get it adopted. And the digital ID is necessary for the surveillance and the use of enforcement to force people to do what you want. And then, of course, the critical issue is the programmable digital money backed up by a social credit system. And so the digital ID is needed for the other two pillars, and that's why it's so central. And we've watched this administration, the Uniparty has built and pushed all the different areas of the digital control grid, but there's different messaging from different sides of the Uniparty. And the conservatives have used election fraud and immigration, and now protecting young people online, to really force the digital ID. We're just watching this week. I've just been paying or learning about what's happening. We're watching an effort by the FCC and the telecommunications bill in the House to institute a process to completely overrule local pushback against telecommunications, so that you can have a very invasive hardware structure of cell towers, but that's coming on the back of enormous pushback against the flock contracts for surveillance, the Skydio contracts, as well as things that the companies are now doing to bring up data centers that are using enormous amounts of energy and water and raising energy expenses for many different areas. So we're watching the control grid fight, not only happening in the financial system with government IDs, but moving into local communities where communities are pushing back against everything from data centers to the flock contract, and finally beginning to realize, wait a minute, we as taxpayers are funding ridiculous amounts of money and carrying higher taxes to pay for a surveillance and control system which is going to work against us. And so for the first time, I'm enthusiastic about two things. One is seeing the local pushback growing, number one. But the other thing is, I'm also starting to see the health and freedom groups understand that if we get financial control with programmable money, everything they've accomplished in the health and food freedom areas will be toast. So it's funny, we have a wonderful website dedicated to financial freedom, and we have a wonderful activist from South Dakota who describes how she gets through to the people in South Dakota who say, look, I have no assets. I don't care if they program my money. And she says, oh, really? Imagine getting this phone call. It's 2030. And we've decided, Mrs. Jones, you have to transgender your 3 children. And if you don't, we'll turn off your money. Anyway, it's getting through to everybody.
Yeah. No, I mean, and we'll get to a point, hopefully, of talking about like the data centers in these local towns, which is one of the parts you mentioned there, which is it is very hopeful to see. I mean, largely it comes to resources and water consumption in different parts that are immediately affecting their lives, but it's just nice to see. And I think that's kind of happening in a lot of these conversations where we're starting to suddenly realize what a lot of us have been pointing out, which is that the general population is not necessarily represented by the two-party illusion of it all.
Right.
But,
well, here's the thing. If I'm up against a flock contract in my local area, or I'm up against a data center going in, it's not some distant person in the White House who's approving it. It's my neighbor who lives next door, or somebody that I know from the PTA. It's somebody in my local area I can go talk to and have a serious discussion with. It's my sheriff who approves the flock contract without telling anybody and is spending my money. So it's coming into an intimate level where people really can take action.
With the flock cameras specifically, this is something that Jason Basler from Free Thought Project and here in the IMA and I are going to be working on going forward in the new year.
Oh, wonderful. So
Yeah.
I'm going to post, we're keeping a collection of pushback against flock and other things like this. So I'll put a link in the chat.
yeah, he's been doing some excellent work on that. I'm glad to see you guys are connecting on that. Well, she was here to talk about it today. But the point is the general, intrusion of all of this stuff and the data center point and flat cameras and all of it. Let's start just a brief point. And actually, in case Catherine, you had thoughts on this that we didn't get to, share in the last discussion of the digital ID overlap. So let's just briefly start with that and move from there into other topics. But so digital ID clearly being a central part of this. Any developments in your view or anybody else that have shifted since last time we talked about it?
So there is a coalition of people pushing back against the Real ID who've asked Rand Paul to hold hearings. Rand Paul has sponsored a bill to repeal the Real ID. And I think if that can gain momentum, we can start to get traction. We are hoping he will have a hearing because many people don't realize, they think the Real ID is just a little star on their driver's license. And, we've been encouraging people to go into their DMV, which they can do in 45 states, and get themselves on, off the Real ID. So in 5 states, you can't roll it back, but in 45 states, you can. And I think more and more people are beginning to realize that the Real ID in the U.S. or a digital ID is sort of at the heart of both the surveillance systems and the financial control. And so that is to me, that shift in consciousness is a good development. We just did another roundup show on the Real ID, and I will post that in the chat as well.
Will anybody else notice anything? Obviously there's movement here. I mean, it's coming around the world. Every single country that I can see is definitely stepping in that direction. But any thoughts from anybody that maybe additional from the show or, Tim, any thoughts and, what's been shifting? I'm glad to see pushback and I definitely do agree with that. But any other thoughts?
where it's come from in the global push. Of course, last year you got the Pact of the Future, the Global Digital Compact, and that's all about the accelerating DPI, digital public infrastructure. And then we just had the B20 is just starting today, which is another one of those things that's pushing the digital public infrastructure. And then that just goes, whatever they suggest at the B20 gets rubber stamped at the G20 a couple of days later. Same thing happened with the, trying to want vaccine passports back in 2022. So, I mean, the global push for it, and plus you had the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation working with the UN for their 50 and 5 campaign to bring digital public infrastructure to 50 countries within 5 years. They just recently reached a milestone of 30 countries signed up for that. So yeah, it's a whole coordinated push for this, and it's been going on for a while.
If I could jump in on the data centers, I know I missed the last IMA. I was out in Chicago, but you are seeing an explosion of them trying to put them in. And one of the things that I don't know that was discussed is Mamdani down in New York City. You already have congestion pricing. You already have a very automated system throughout the state where you just drive through the highways and they bill you. I've got one of those lovely tolls right here, actually, in my hand from the last time I was in New York and nowhere near the city. And when we talk about these data centers in particular, I do agree with Catherine, but a lot of these people are very underhandedly fast tracking these things. And there is one already being proposed. I think it's a smaller one at like 170 acres right outside of Oneonta, New York, where I lived on Otsego Lake. And what I see with these, first of all, they give you the canard that this is going to be great for the economy and give, hundreds of jobs, like a good steakhouse. Like Texas Roadhouse gives hundreds of jobs. Who cares? It's not like they're going to be great paying. It's not like it's going to change your world. You've already had an explosion in pricing since COVID-19 84 on natural gas, electricity in general. That's my brother's highest cost. His mortgage, he doesn't pay a lot on that, is less than what he pays in utilities every single month. And if you've seen what's happened in other states that have put these things in, and remember, they want to move to mini nuclear facilities for a lot of these larger ones later on. But right now, everybody's energy cost goes up in those localized areas. Nashville is a great example, and there is no benefit for you and I. Instead, large corporations get to harness and sift through this data at an incredible rate, many of whom pay little to no taxes. And unfortunately, it's a system where we're being set up to enslave ourselves. And again, you are seeing some pushback at these local community meetings, but whether or not they're going to be able to stop this data center, I don't know. Like, I'm very worried. I saw what happened during COVID, and there were so many people willing to sign off on some authoritarian nightmare check. Remember, they promised all of these communities, and I was at some of these meetings, a decade's worth of COVID money. It wasn't this year or next year. So a lot of these things come with a big front end for the people in charge that are voting on it. And Mamdani, when he talks about, public internet or government-run grocery stores, the first thing that rings in my head, especially with the grocery stores, is the WEF project that they did. And this was the World Food Program where they put you on the blockchain. And it did have biometric identification. The first thing comes up is secure digital identity. So this is stuff that's already been beta tested globally. And now I think that the big push, at least in that regard, is going to be New York State, and in particular, New York City, with the data centers being in upstate and central New York, and then the main moves being done in New York City for that control grid.
Well, let's get into the data centers. I mean, that's a very large part of this conversation, and the overlap to not just, the privacy aspect of what it's actually representing, but the resource draw on the area, and or any other thoughts anybody has about it. Because the data centers are a very large part of this. That is an early part of it. People are discussing this as sort of a data center coup of our society, or there's a lot of different views on this, because it really is encroaching, not just taking resources, but towns are being destroyed. Towns cease to exist, like Spruce Pine we've talked about in North Carolina.
So here's the thing. If you look, there's a lot of magical thinking around AI that makes no sense. And if you drill down, an excellent book is Karen Howe's book, Empire of AI, about open AI. But if you drill down, what you discover is that AI is good at certain things. And one of the things it's good at is processing anything that can be tracked or mapped or followed with mathematical data. And what is that? That's spatial movement, that's use of our time, that's use of our money. So there's a lot of disappointment in the investment community because AI was sold to them as something that would improve productivity. And of course, it's not doing any of that. 95% of the companies surveyed say they've gotten no benefit from it whatsoever. Because in fact, the real benefit is supposed to be political and economic control through the data centers. And they are really there to track spatial movements, and that includes self-driving cars and where we go and what we do, including if you want to lock us down. But it's financial transactions. And if you look at the application of a social credit system to programmable money and financial transactions, you're talking about mammoth amounts of data, just unbelievable amounts of data. And that's what you're watching, is this enormous expenditure of land, water, and energy to build the infrastructure capacity you need to collect through surveillance and tracking and then implement control. This is what it takes for a very few group of people to control the many. And that's what this is. It's basically the data centers, the telecommunication wires, the drones, and the Skydio kind of operations. I hate to say that this is really designed to turn the United States into Gaza.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And shout out to fellow IMA member Richard Grove, who a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, was referring to the digital prison landscape as Planet Gaza. And
Right.
I was a carpenter for a very, very long time. And when you build a house, the first thing that you start with is the foundation. And that's exactly what the data centers are. The digital ID is the framing.
Right.
It's the skeleton of the unit. And once you've got those two things, I mean, yes, there's utilitarian things that you add to it, but you've got most of the hard part done. You throw shingles on a roof, you've got almost all of the hard part done, and then everything else is no longer structural. It's functional to cosmetic. And that's what's going to be left over to build of that digital prison landscape, where we may be allowed to decorate our own prison cells as long as we're the battery source and we're plugging in to hook up the decoration of our prison cells, or to check in on how our AI avatar did on its date with somebody else's AI avatar for a dating service that we're paying stablecoin to be a part of. But it doesn't have to be this way. I maintain that. I maintain that in a hard and fast future.
Yeah, I think the fact that it's we need to consider as well that this is a global project. I mean, it stems from SDG 16.9. That's where the policy trajectory started. And if you consider that some of the things that have been said recently, so if we consider like the comments of Bill Gates, who seems to be kind of backing off the climate alarmism message, and we've certainly seen the mood music change very much in the United States, and it's starting to change in Europe and in the UK as well. Because if you're going to commit to the kind of infrastructure explosion, the energy requirements for that, I think it was the IEEA, which is the International Electrical Engineers Association, I think, but the people basically that gather the data on our grids, our national grid systems the world over, they calculated that if this trajectory is going to continue, and if the data centers that will be required for the digital transformation that is in prospect between now and 2050. That will mean adding essentially adding a new Japan to the global energy requirements every year between now and 2050. So there's, the thing that is probably most concerning about that is obviously that's not going to be done with windmills and solar panels. That's not going to deliver the kind of energy transition that we are talking about. The scary part, I guess, we might as well talk about it, is that those calculations are based on the assumption that we are still using the amount of energy that we currently do. So if the part of the equation that might be tempting for them to look at is how to reduce the amount of energy that we currently use. So I think there are two things that are running in parallel in terms of the narrative. And that is that, we need to be more mindful of our carbon footprints and therefore consider how to reduce our own energy consumption. But at the same time, we're gonna have this incredible increase in energy demand, then there also needs to be some recalibration of the narrative that they give about climate change, which the European Union a year ago, more than a year ago, was they changed the focus of their annual climate review. Instead of focusing purely on the rhetoric that they had used up to that point, they started talking about the importance of energy for economic development and how economic development was also a climate issue that was linked to energy. So we are seeing that shift in the narrative. And I think the reason that we're seeing it is, I think, as we all know, 2030 is obviously a pivotal juncture for the global project. And as we are getting closer to that, we are starting to see all kinds of changes in the way that we are being presented with our propaganda, due to the necessity of what they are going to do as we approach that 2030 point. Because I think the plan is to have the infrastructure pretty well solidified, at least have that, as Steve was saying, have that foundation in place by 2030.
Just to speak to that point about the propaganda leading to that, and he was talking about, energy systems. First of all, the carbon footprint thing for any thinking person has to be annihilated once these things are put into play. Like you said, the amount of resources that they're taking up. I always, when somebody brings that up, I'm like, yeah, well, what's the carbon footprint of an intercontinental ballistic missile? I'm like, it's way higher than mine. And they don't seem to have any problem using those all the time because they're taking the lives of people that they're really concerned about the carbon footprint. But I don't know if anybody saw the recent commentary by the Muskernuts himself, talking about how in the future, when we're living under AI-driven society, and a lot of this will be AI-driven, there isn't going to be cash. And it isn't just going to be a digital ID or blockchain. It's actually going to be based on the amperage of the energy that we produce for the system. I mean, when I saw that, and everybody's chuckling and smiling, and I'm thinking to myself, talk about a bad episode of Black Mirror. This guy is hero sauce to a bunch of just unthinking, rabid enthusiasts. And he's openly talking about these things. He's even also talking about another part of this control grid that would take AI-driven automation and data centers. And that's that you're not going to be driving your own car. Even the one that you own today essentially will be refitted with something that makes it an autonomous vehicle. So he's probably, to me, one of the most concerning figures because he is so out in the forefront and he is projecting these messages into the public arena.
You telling me that you don't want to earn your good boy points by getting on your treadmill every morning and jogging for freedom? And AI Pete Hegseth will award you bonus points if you shave while you're on the treadmill very important to Pete. This is something that, you know, we can all take heart in, Jay. It's a future that we could be proud of. In shape, clean shaven, and slaves to the digital panopticon.
This brings up
So-
really important. Oh, go ahead, Catherine. Go ahead.
I wanted to point out there's a great controversy going on in Maha, Make America Healthy Again. So there was just a Maha meeting where Neuralink, I believe, was a sponsor, but they got to give a presentation, as did the CRISPR gene editing folks. And, you know, there's been a big debate because Kennedy keeps sending out positive tweets on wearables, and then his supporters insist, no, it was the Susie Wiles chief of staff who really did it. But you're watching an embracing of wearables by the Maha group that is really making a profound contribution to trying to sell the control grid in a way that is truly gruesome. Because there's not, you know, one thing that is not being addressed by Washington is anything to really stop the mass atrocity that started in 2021 and still has not stopped.
Well, there's an interesting overlap to, like, you talk about the great poisoning and the reduction of the population. Jason brings up an interesting and inevitable point of, you know, using the human species as batteries, or however which way you look at that. And that overlaps with what is also inevitable, as I was briefly showing before. And it's not just water, which is just the obvious issue with resources. So it almost brings up like a self-fulfilling prophecy that, you know, they don't have the resources necessary to make these things happen. So they're going to have to fill that gap with something else. But at the same time, you know, the argument of depopulation, you know, and so how do we see that? Are these different forces, you know, however you want to take that?
Can I speak to that water issue really quickly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, a lot of my work is surrounded in transhumanism, and that has brought me to NASA and an individual, Dennis Bushnell, who was their chief scientist for decades. He was around since Gemini, before Apollo. He recently resigned a little over 2 years ago from that position. But many of his presentations from the late 90s up until he was done was the fact that our fresh water is oversauce. And you think to yourself, what are they talking about? Why would our fresh water be gone? Seems pretty plentiful, right? Even if you have a massive increase in human population. And now it is becoming more and more apparent that fresh water is going to be utilized in these AI data centers. And anybody can go and watch these presentations, and they're talking about, you know, growing certain biomass in salt water and living off of that, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, he gets into things like transmutating the general populace. I mean, very openly. He also talks about, you know, we talked about productivity improvement, right? We talked about how they were sold on that. In these presentations, he says that is a code word to let everybody else know that our quality of life is going to subside and go down because we're not going to be allowed to use that much energy. So, you know, the subtext is already there via our government, via NASA, via Bushnell, and Bushnell very, very much a part of the Defense Department, et cetera. I guess the Department of War right now, as he was a rep for that and the NSA as well. So, like I said, anybody can go and watch a history of this, but just watch NASA's position on natural water and how it's going to dry up. And one of the big booms that a lot of investors are looking at is the monetization of fresh water, even beyond what we have with bottles of water over that we've been trained over the last 25 years. Wasn't a thing until the mid 90s, guys. The faucet was okay. So I just wanted to speak to that really quickly.
We're looking at floating desalination plants and a number of other different things that they can do with this. There's sorry, Catherine, go ahead.
So I was going to throw in two little factoids. I don't know if you guys have seen the presentation by Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, after the first Trump administration. He did an interview and said, given the biohacks available, he was going to be the first generation to either live forever or the last generation to not live forever. And that was probably a year after Sean Parker, the co-head, one of the co-founders of Facebook, said because he was a billionaire, he was going to live to 145. So if in the framework of the mega rich versus everyone else, you know, the control grid is so the mega rich, a very few can control the many, but the mega rich seem to think that they're going to live for a much longer lifespan than we are currently living, and that's going to be a problem. And the way to do that, the way to deal with that, is to downsize us. The last thing they can afford environmentally is for everybody living forever, apparently. The other thing I wanted to bring up, before I left Washington, I saw an excellent presentation. I was invited to the Department of Defense for a briefing by the Defense Intelligence Agency. And actually, this one I saw in the City of London, given to investors by a DoD intelligence officer. And what he said was that although the oil and gas in Gaza was very valuable, that it was nowhere near as valuable as the aquifers that Gaza sat on. And the big push to basically take control of Gaza was to get control of the water and aquifers. And if you look at the role that Israel wants to play, or that group that runs Israel, I should say, in running the control grid, I'm assuming that to do that, they need control of those Gaza aquifers. So I think the aquifers are a very important part of what's going on in the master redevelopment plan. One of the things Witkoff said in an interview with Jared Kushner the other day, it was published on October 16th, was the redevelopment plan had been in existence for at least 2 years. Poor Jared Kushner almost fell off his chair. Looking at Witkoff like, please shut up. But if you know how long it takes to build and create a master development plan of that enormity, you're talking about a plan that would have been underway, in 2021, 22 to, and then the beauty of having that plan ready to go in October 2023 is then you can build the bombing around the clearance that's necessary.
Absolutely. I also think we're going to see Elon pivot for what the boring company's role is, and you're going to see him going after underground water sources that are quite honestly vast.
I imagine that's already happening.
Oceanic in size. What's that, Ryan?
I just said I imagine that's already happening because of what we're talking about. Like, it's clearly they've been aware of this coming, like Michael Berry and the Big Short movie kind of made that something people talk about at the end. He made his prediction about water, but well before that, people writing articles. I mean, this has been a long time coming for the elitist circles,
Well, I mean, Goldman, Catherine, you can speak to this probably better than anybody, but a number of Wall Street firms and investment firms have been using, large language models and AI type programs to trade for 15 years. You would think that they would have the foresight to, kind of scope out and plan out how they were going to be able to do that at scale at a rate that would make them competitive or better than everyone else going forward too.
Yeah, as usual, the things that we end up getting presented are something that they've been using against us for 2 decades. It's kind of usually the way it goes.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Just interestingly, Bernie Madoff's original electronic trading system was called artificial intelligence.
That's perfect. And do you feel that there's any connection to that, or is that just a coincidence in your mind?
Well, I think it's probably a coincidence, but it's ironic, isn't it? I mean, supposedly the biggest Ponzi scheme ever. Although I would question that, because I think the monetary system is the biggest Ponzi scheme ever. But yeah, he called it artificial intelligence.
Well, so there's 3 things that jumped to my mind on this, the direction we could take. And Catherine touched on 2 very important points. The Gaza overlap, the technocracy, which Derek just put a great article about. It's very important. The living forever, mind in the cloud, God complex that I want at least end with to talk about, but also the overlap to Stargate, the data centers, and like the vaccine biological health side of it. So we're never going to get to everything in the show. So take it whichever direction you like. Pick one.
I got something with the sensing stuff. With it kind of goes into the panopticon, not of just cities and people and stuff, but what's going on inside. So their bodies. So this year's World Economic Forum emerging technologies top 10, 2 of them. One was biochemical sensing, Another one was collaborative sensing. Collaborative sensing, that's for your smart grid. That's for what does this guy from IBM says? It says, what if we have cameras virtually ubiquitous in a city? Similarly, what if we have every street light controlled ubiquitously through a city? What if every vehicle communicates with a central location, again, throughout a city? So what these, and all this stuff is, they call it vehicle to everything technology. So we talk about digital ID. It's not just for people. Their vehicles are going to have a digital ID. Nature is going to have a digital ID for biodiversity, for, as Jason was talking about, monetizing, tokenizing, and all that, water, land, air, and all that. Now, the other one for biochemical sensing, this one freaked me out because, all right, so a quote from the report from the WEF was, while typical sensors, such as well-known COVID-19 tests, are single-use, the challenge in autonomous biochemical sensing is to achieve continuous monitoring and electronic data capture. You wouldn't even need to show papers. You wouldn't have to show a digital ID or a vaccine passport. If that's inside you, constantly emitting those transmissions, that's game over. So the convergence of these things is insane. Talked about the data centers. You need 30 gigawatts of power is what they're trying to generate, 30 watts of power. Larry Fink said, like, you can't do that on intermittent wind and solar. So they're looking at nuclear, small modular reactors, whatever it is. So they want renewables and reliables for the plebs, and the AI data centers to fuel these types of surveillance systems. And when you said again about the wearables, man, just go back to Yuval Noah Harari at the 2020 WEF meeting. You wear a wristband and you're listening to the great leader. You can clap and say and look like you're all for it, but all that data, all that reading what's going on inside you, you're straight to the gulag the next morning.
So you talk about the internal biosurveillance, and this overlaps with COVID, Bob Langer, Charles Lieber, the work that's been going on a long time. The only way I see that being possible, which I very much think is either already happening or about to, is either some kind of nanotech or some kind of graphene oxide, maybe both. And the way that there's studies talking about putting graphene oxide, like Jason's talking about, in nature, in the water, to be able to monitor and tokenize. I mean, these are real conversations, and so that's why I think the COVID-19 conversation is so important to all this. But it's like, in a way, if we focus only on the vaccine, we're missing the forest for the trees for what the real agenda was and where it's really going. And it connects with this. Good.
With the more of the transhumanism stuff and talking about living 140 years or whatever, the Pentagon, the Rand Corporation put out a report for the Pentagon. They're researching not just Internet of Body stuff, but the gene editing stuff. So they say that it has the potential to make humans stronger, more intelligent, or more adapted to extreme environments. And they were even researching adding reptilian genes to humans so that they can see in infrared, and then increasing muscle mass and stuff. And so if you can do that to amplify or augment someone in a very superhuman godlike way, you can do the same thing to reduce, to minimize, to make someone lesser than what they are as well.
So before we get into, we talked about basically those that think that they can live either extended biological lives or possibly biologically live forever, as opposed to the idea of the plebs euthanizing themselves and uploading their consciousness, really, and AI recreation, in my opinion.
We should touch on that, by the way. Keep going. But that first,
I wanted to touch on something else because this month, one of my viewers sent me this lecture from 1984 called "The New Human Race." It was by a guy named Michio Kushi. Never heard of the guy. I watched this thing, and it literally, first of all, it really upset me at how accurate he was. So he comes out in 1984 when I'm 5 years old, and he starts talking about meeting a colleague that he went to university with in Japan, and that he's basically part of this bioengineering company that is already recreating organs. So think about what we're doing in the printing field. And I mean, he makes some big claims, and he says, listen, they're already doing this, but there's not a commercial market for it. And by the end of this, not only does he give a amazingly accurate timeline, where he starts talking about first the bio nation, okay, and this kind of experimentation going on, but then the psycho nation of them drugging everybody with SSRI type drugs and even the children, then into the 2020 periods where we're in the ultra psycho nation when everybody's unhealthy, They're being sprayed with toxic chemicals all the time. I mean, the guy absolutely nails it. And basically at 2030, he says that, yes, we will be biologically controlled with this nanotechnology utilizing frequencies that are manipulated by satellites. And, I'd love to think that that is a fantasy, but there is so much communication throughout human existence, really throughout our technological experience, that information is carried invisibly. Whether it's our radio waves back in the day or our UHF and VHF bands of our standard definition to what we're doing right now, where we are in all separate parts of the world in real time communicating, a lot of that is invisible. So what worries me is that we've already seen standard type technologies shed on human beings via traditional vaccinations. Lord knows what we really got with the DARPA run bio nanotechnology that the Muskernuts' Tesla and CureVac injected into a bunch of people. And then the big question is with the geoengineering. Yes, we know about the barium, the strontium, the sulfur oxide, but what is stopping these madmen and women from putting other things in this? I often go to a clip of Herman Kahn back at the Hudson Institute. For those that don't know, Herman Kahn was half of the inspiration for Dr. Strangelove, where he talks about spraying the general populace to calm them down. And he talks about, yeah, go ahead, Catherine.
Yeah, Jason, I just want to mention Elsa von Hamlin did an excellent interview with Clifford Carnicom of the Carnicom Institute this year on the Solari Report. And Clifford documents in great detail why the bioengineered living material in the spray is exactly the same as what they put in the COVID-19 injections. It's basically the same stuff. It's just, it's smaller and able to presumably get through the blood-brain barrier more easily. Right. So, and it's clearly material that I believe it interacts with the cellular and telecommunications. So I wanted to mention, we just published 2 really amazing pieces. One, we finally found someone who I think is the top scholar we've been able to find in the world on military-grade neurowarfare, who's gone through all the patents. The other thing I could have mentioned is Patrick Wood and David Hughes and Lissa Johnson and Daniel Brody have done 3 OmniWar symposiums where they get deeply into this military-grade neurowarfare technology. And then we also published a very integrating piece of Josh Steinman talking about cognitive liberty and how with these technologies, he believes the #1 issue of our day is, can we maintain cognitive liberty and how do we do it? And I think that is critical because I don't think they can institute the control grid unless they can literally sufficiently brainwash people to get them in.
So you and I have talked a lot about neuroscience in the past, Catherine, and it may be, I imagine, self-evident to all of us here why what we just discussed ties into the control grid. But Catherine, or any one of you, let's piece together for those that may not recognize why what Jason just described is potentially a central part of what Catherine's describing and how that actually controls our lives. Because I think to us, we're studying nanotech and everything else, but to others, it might not be as clear.
So the first world population is ingesting through all means of digital technology enormous amounts of sort of online hypnosis and brainwashing. And it's very, very effective. So you have entrainment technology, which opens us up and makes us susceptible, and then enormous amounts of subliminal programming. And it's why you see people literally acting in complete defiance of their own self-interest on, again and again. You couldn't poison people to this extent without that kind of mind control. Think of it this way. If you look at the old movies on the Manchurian Candidate and what it took to brainwash somebody, it was a very labor-intensive experience. Now you're talking about being able to get kids on video games or people, on slot machines, literally in casinos, and in remarkably short order, seriously brainwash them without them realizing what's been happening. And it's very much used to market consumer goods and all sorts of products and services. I ran into it because as an investment advisor, it is very successful at marketing financial fraud. And I would literally run into very intelligent, very well-educated clients who've been totally brainwashed, either through their computer, through the smartphone. Smartphones, in my opinion, have contributed dramatically to it. And I would literally find a client who could buy silver at 2% over spot, but wanted to spend 24% over spot and couldn't explain to me why. And I know exactly why. They'd gotten, ruthless precious metals dealers, marketing to them using this technology.
And my point is just to overlap that with what Jason's discussing and like how all of this comes together. I just did a discussion about smart dust and whether COVID-19 was a part of that, but you consider the nanotech, you consider even the graphene oxide conversation, which as much as there's a lot of false things around that, is a very real conversation. And then the neuroscience part of it, which is more through technology. To what degree do we think this is already happening?
Well,
it's done. We are all organically chipped.
And here's what's scary to me is, again, I think that, again, I always say my biggest thing these days, I used to think that we're going to take back the constitutional republic. We're going to be rare, and it's stay human, at least as much as possible, right? I didn't take any hate and lie shots. I do wonder whether or not some of that material, just from being alive and interacting with other human beings, is in my body. You talked about what they may or may not be spraying. Well, you just said smart dust. We've been utilizing smart dust publicly as the military since the war of terror in Iraq. Annie Jacobson wrote a big book called First Platoon, where they're utilizing that type of technology. Then you look at that technology that, again, was publicly revealed over 20 years ago. I just got into a conversation with somebody recently about laser technology. They were kind of goofing on Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has grown on me significantly, who I didn't even realize in September held a hearing on geoengineering and introduced the Clear Skies Act. Her and Massey are kind of at the forefront of this thing. And I bring that up is because, when I saw, the Babylon Bee making fun of Tucker Carlson for having Dane Wigington on. I don't know if you saw that one headline, but it's, Tucker Carlson next to Bigfoot, and Bigfoot's talking about the mind control chemtrails being sprayed by lasers and Jews or something like that, right? And, just this week, last month, Iron Beam was revealed to the public via Israel. Is anybody aware of what that is? So that's their new laser interceptor program for missile defense. Of course, they have these technologies. The Soviets and the United States had them in the 80s. Israel is an ally. And again, those type of technologies, laser technology, if you will, directed energy weapons, we don't know how they've been utilized for sure. We can certainly speculate. But again, the general public makes a big joke out of all these things. So I think we're up for a big challenge. Catherine just talked about the brainwashing aspects of it. And look, if we've been made to be less healthy, the big brainwashing out there is that we should have free healthcare. Yeah, free healthcare would be great if it was actually healthcare and I had a choice. And it wasn't a system where, again, you are going to have a digital ID. You are going to have to jump through hoops and do these certain things and pay into this system, et cetera, et cetera. And then the medicines that they offer you are going to be, quote unquote, AI driven. So you can't question them. And are they going to be healthy? Are they going to actually help you? I would contend not so much, but that other tier, that predator class tier, the one we talked about that wants to biologically live forever, they're going to have a whole different system. I mean, Google itself, AKA Alphabet, has had their own immortality division for well over a decade. It's called Calico. And they're not just talking about living forever. They're talking about de-aging as well.
Yeah, and I definitely think that's a very important part of the overlapping God complex part of the discussion, right? So we're discussing a lot of different things that are shortening our lifespans, or at least using our lifespans for other purposes. And this weird mindset of people that genuinely think that they can live forever. But there's two parts to it, right? There's the putting your mind in the cloud. that kind of idea, but also like what Jason and I've talked about in the past, like the transhumanism connection, where you're actually becoming something different and living in that sense. But this is the like Peter Thiel kind of like the mindset that they can become this through some kind of like technocratic God. I mean, what do you guys think about that in regard to what that could actually materialize as, other than just what they visualize it as from like a Peter Thiel community?
I mean, they're hardcore, bro. They believe it. Like
I
would say this. I'm very doubtful. I think that we have a biological lifespan that could possibly be extended to a certain extent. I don't think that we can quote unquote live forever. I think that's the big lie. I think that it goes throughout human history. People of power have believed that, whether they can find the fountain of youth or the tree of life. I think they're fooling themselves. Now, the question is, do they fool the vast majority of us along the way that we're going to be able to upload our consciousness into this digital wonderverse that we can be anything on? I've often talked about this transgender movement. Any way they can biologically move you away from your reality, and not only your biological reality, but your spiritual reality. And I'm not telling you what to believe, but again, there's a lot of invisible stuff out there, folks. That
let me jump in on this too. It's more so about the, it's possible that they might let you think you can go into the idea you put it out a second ago. I think is interesting that you might just be tricked into killing yourself thinking you're going into the cloud. But I think it's more about that they will. I mean, I never see a world in which they're going to let this be something the average populace gets to take part in, unless it's like a little pen that we're living in inside of a digital, scenario. I'm seeing it more as them creating a circumstance where they lord over us because they're, in essence, living forever, like whether it's mine in the cloud or something. And like you pointed out, they truly believe this, whether it's possible or not, or whether they're even lying about it. They seem to, in some cases, believe that. So what does that end up driving? It's the mindset that they can live generationally and control populations, and that they're bigger than one, than everything, really.
Listen to Kurzweil, bro. It's beyond that, right? Like, he's going to resurrect his dead dad. He's going to become a being of light and travel the wonderverse, the metaverse, like the whole entire universe. I mean, these people have put it on paper. And I think that Kurzweil's out there as a spokesperson, very smart guy, right? But whether or not that's a reality, remember, he's kind of curved it. Remember when he went on Rogan and Rogan kept challenging him on the idea of uploading your consciousness and that's not you. And remember when he did the Age of Spiritual Machines in '99, he actually admitted that these would be replicas. It would just be non-carbon based life that we created. So it's not us. They know this. And I think that's why that predator class is trying to drive. We're getting experimented on. They think they can biologically live forever, and we're the guinea pigs, in my opinion.
So can I just jump in? I want to get back to ground, because every 80 or 120 years, we go through a currency reset. And the central bankers have put us into a reset, and that's at the very heart of what is happening. And no matter how amazing and powerful new technology is, and no matter how unable we are culturally to handle it intelligently, at the heart of this is the leadership has to get that reset done. And Ian just wrote a good book, an excellent book that describes how all of this digital technology fits with how we're evolving the financial system. So maybe, Ryan, could we turn to that? Because I think that will ground us back into, sort of the steamroller that's rolling over us right now.
Yeah, to Jason's points, though, this is why you shouldn't give trust fund kids ayahuasca.
Yeah.
You just... Bad idea.
Go ahead, Ian, if you want to jump in and discuss, the overview here of your book.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting, actually, the conversation that we've had, because much of this kind of notion of people thinking that for example, questioning whether people like Thiel and Kurzweil and that think that they can possibly live forever, and the things that they talk about, and they're already selling us a notion of AI that isn't true. They're already making the claims for what AI is capable of doing that is frequently touted is not true. AI is not capable of doing, that even, the next stage of AI, which might be theory of mind AI, we're nowhere near that. So it's not as if the things that they're already saying are true. They're not. So whether the things that they speculate that they might be able to do in the future, such as the assumption that there'll be a singularity, that kind of thing, that's debatable. It's highly debatable. It's not set in stone, and it's not. They're using these kinds of narratives to sell what Catherine's talking about here, which is the key game that they're playing, which is a complete transformation of the international monetary and financial system. That's what they're after at the moment. That's why the Bank for International Settlements, for example, I mean, that Catherine's put that, and Solaria put that thing together, which is showing the digital ID at the center of a kind of progression towards a new control system, which is very much going to be based upon, we only need to look at what they're saying, it's going to be based upon programmable digital currency of some type. So whether that will be a mixture of central bank digital currency and stable coins, or deposit tokens, stable coins, and central bank digital currency, these are all variations of the same theme. And they're very much being, different parts of the world and different countries are going for a different model. But what they effectively are trying to do is create, something that Mark Carney spoke about in 2019 at Jackson Hole, which is a synthetic hegemonic currency. So that doesn't mean a single dominant currency necessarily. It's an interoperable network of programmable digital currencies. So that could incorporate all those different models of different types of digital currencies, and there's no reason why it shouldn't. The Bank for International Settlements has been working on interoperability. It's been its primary focus in all of its development and innovation hubs for the best part of a decade or more. So the idea is that all money will be exchangeable across borders instantaneously, no matter what the denomination is or what the type of digital currency is. It will be instantly exchangeable for any other. Now, whether or not that will be settled on a central bank digital currency wholesale layer, as in whether that will replace reserves, personally, I think that is probably where it will end up. But in order to get us into this place, one of the things that the Bank for International Settlement has also stressed, and they're not alone, the World Economic Forum and the IMA and other monetary institutions and think tanks have suggested the same thing, is that digital ID must be first. Because as Catherine said, digital ID is the key to get us into this new control system, because it's only with a robust digital ID that is fixed to your biometric data. And one of the things that is happened in the UK recently is that our government has gone down the bizarre route of saying that it's going to issue us with a single digital ID app. Well, that app is not digital ID, but they're introducing the notion of digital ID through the app. So, personally, I think that the thing is so that we will protest against the thing that is not digital ID. But the infrastructure for digital ID that they actually want us to adopt, which is through something that they call the One Login the UK government's One Login system, which is a login system that will require you to submit your biometric data in order to use any and all government services by December 2027. You will have to submit your biometric data. So that's going to be facial recognition. That will unlock the gov.uk wallet, which the UK government has not been open about what the basis for that wallet is, but it's going to be a distributed ledger of some kind, almost certainly blockchain. And that will be the digital key that systems like Palantir Gotham, which enables interoperability by linking all the different what they call disparate databases together, by converting all the data from those disparate databases into machine readable exchangeable formats. So you can create one single unified ledger, which will hold all assets, including your digital ID token, enabling your assets and your rights and all your contracts to be linked to your digital ID. That is what they are looking for in terms of a global monetary and financial system. That is what they want to, they are building. And it's not that this could be happening. This could be where we're heading. The only debate really kind of at the global level appears to be which coin is going to be dominant, how coins are going to be relate to each other. Feasibly, we're heading. I mean, one of the things that the Trump administration said about the reason for issuing dollar-backed stable coins is to protect the sovereignty of the US dollar, or the system that they are creating of a completely interoperable international monetary and financial system doesn't require, and you could feasibly see that it doesn't require any kind of sovereign currency, that because all currencies will be instantaneously exchangeable no matter what denomination they're in the digital international monetary and financial system. So the key to the problem that they've got, and what Mark Carney spoke about, was this thing called destabilizing asymmetry at the heart of the monetary system, was the debt. That's what he was talking about. And he was talking about the fact that obviously even when you look at the levels of debt, it's not a recoverable situation. There's no way that debt can be addressed, and therefore that means changes to the monetary system, which would mean the end of an expansionist monetary policy, which has been the monetary policy that we've had since the 1970s. So, which is key to how economies are controlled. The debt levels and the expansion of the monetary supply is key to the centralized control of economies. So that was a big problem. But tokenization in the new digital monetary system, where you can vastly increase your asset base, where you can have asset classes, natural assets such as the tokenization of nature itself, converting, which is, again, that goes back to sustainable development agenda 21, which spoke about the potential for ecosystem services to be converted into tradable financial assets. Well, that's exactly what the potential for, feasibly has been mooted, a $4 to $5 quadrillion natural asset economy. That's gonna give you a very healthy asset side of your balance sheet, compared to what looks like currently unbridled and unrecoverable debt suddenly vanishes in a puff of monetary magic. So they're clearly building this system, but the key for it to work is us. We have to adopt it. So the game is on to get us to adopt it. And different countries have got a different approach. The US approach is different from the British approach. It's led into the system, whereas in the US, it is more slowly catchy monkey, building it bit by bit. In the UK, they're in a rush in the UK. And I think it's notable that the EU are in a rush as well. And I think that's because of the stable coins, that, the potential dominance of the US dollar-backed stable coins.
So Ian, can I just interrupt and ask you a question? In the UK, it's clear that, so let's get back to carrots and sticks. In the UK and Canada, they're definitely using sticks. In the US, they're using carrots. They're offering huge and hideous profits to just come in and finance the control grid. And they're trying to get everybody making money on financing the digital ID, making money, they're promising, if you just switch your money over to the distributed ledger, you'll make huge and hideous fortunes. And if you just put, right now, the top 7 control grid stocks are 50% of the S&P, and everybody's 401k is up to their eyeballs with it, and they're making a ton of money. So the Americans love the control grid because they think they're making a ton of money, and they don't understand they're making money building something. When it's done, they just take all the money away.
You know, what you said there, Ian, with Catherine's input as well, it's interesting that you're creating a circumstance that is the illusion of choice, which makes perfect sense to what you're describing. They, like you said, they need us to choose this. And so if you give people multiple choices, as you said, it's interoperable. So they don't care which one you choose. And they'll pretend like it's completely free choice because we get to pick which shot or which, you know, like they did with the COVID thing. And, you know, you can take this or go to the back of the line. We're not forcing you. You know, it's the same kind of thing. And I think that's really important to think about, especially the choice part of it. And I think, you know, we're about an hour now. So I think it's, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. A little delay. Go ahead.
No, yeah. I mean, I was just going to say that in the UK, to get people to go along with it, this notion that they brought out, this thing brick card, is they've decided that the way that they're going, in my view, because brick card is not digital ID, but everybody thinks it is digital ID. There are protest movements and political movements building up in the UK against brick card. But the thing that they need to be protesting against is one login, because that's where you'll submit your biometric ID. And the government doesn't want you to think that that is digital ID. Like, it doesn't want it. It's fundamentally lying to every single British citizen, because digital ID will be formed through putting your entering as it. This isn't unique to the UK. This is how digital ID will work everywhere. The key, and we were talking earlier about what is your digital ID. Your digital ID is your biometrics. It's your face, it's your fingerprints, it's your iris scans. That's your digital ID. That is the key token that will link you into the system, which means that, you know, for example, you can be spotted on facial recognition cameras because you've submitted your digital ID, your face. If you don't submit your digital ID, then obviously the cameras can't recognize you. But the same is true with the systems that we will use. And once they have, you know, other than saving their monetary expansionist kind of control scheme, the real purpose of digital ID is social engineering. Because if you can control what, where, when, with who we all transact, then you've got this exquisite social control system. So it's two things. It's the necessary evolution of their monetary control system, and it is an exquisitely designed social engineering and control system. So this is why we cannot afford, in my view, and this is something that I've been arguing a lot for in obviously in the UK, we cannot afford to cross that Rubicon, because even if the short-term gains, and as you know, Catherine was saying, to start with, people will be making incredible amounts of money out of these investments, and consumers will get better deals with digital currency. That's how it will be pushed out. You know, you'll go into your store and you'll get a £20, you'll get a 20% discount if you use your digital currency. So people will be sucked into it. And as I said, in the UK, they're just lying. But people will be sucked into it anyway. And once they're in this system, you know, in 10, 20 years time, I think, you know, within a half a generation or a generation or so, that's when it will start to dawn on people the extent of loss of sovereignty and control. They just won't have it anymore, because it won't be programmed by some faceless bureaucrat sitting in an office somewhere. It will be programmed by AI algorithm that will be making decisions about your life in real time. So, well, you know, I think that we really need to kind of push back on this by not complying with it to start with. Because I think once we started to comply with it, we're lost.
Yeah. Well, and this is the essence of the show, right? I mean, today in general is the control grid and how it builds around us. So, I mean, we've had a really great conversation. As always, there's probably 1,000 points that we could get to add to this, and we will have plenty more panels to come. But let's kind of end with final thoughts. Is it where we're at with this? And to wrap up, whoever wants to start.
So I'll just jump in and say, I was just looking at the polls on Money and Markets with John Titus, and we were seeing that the greatest upset currently is, depending on how you phrase it, the loss of sovereignty vis-a-vis the Israeli networks and mega donors and Epstein. But I would just say you're talking about instituting a program where essentially Epstein can go to the unemployment bureau. They won't need him anymore because you're essentially turning over control of your children, to the people who used Epstein to poach. So this is, we don't have a financial problem, we have a governance problem. And if you look at who governs, and not only their hyper-materialism, but their lack of respect for the human race, you are giving dictatorial, literally slavery powers to the people who did Epstein. That's not what you want to do. And so, Ian's right, you have to turn the ship before you hit the iceberg, and the time to turn the ship is now.
Here.
I guess I'll jump in with my final thought. My big thing is I'm going to be following a lot of these AI data centers, the implementation of these type of congestion pricing and automated programs, along with a lot of the blockchain technology that we were talking about. USDC essentially is the US dollar via Coinbase. There's no conversion anymore. It just acts as money. And as Ian said earlier, I don't expect it to be one thing globally, but I do expect it to all interact through these different platforms. So that doesn't matter. But I think the data centers are the thing that we have to push back against the most, along with a digital identity. And I'm hoping that people grassroots can do so. I don't have a lot of hope for New York State, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, all of this is 100% dependent on regular people adopting it or being pushed into adopting it. And the really great thing for us, the people who don't want this, is nobody needs any of this crap. Nobody needs it. So it is very, very possible to have multiple conversations relatively simply on just a person-to-person level, where talking about all of the different ways you can opt out of this and not participate in it, and directing people to the other people that have been putting in the time and the energy and the resources to have a landing place for people opting out. That we're at a point now where that's part of everybody, should be a part of everybody's day-to-day, is having a couple of conversations with just regular people or friends and family about not taking part in this particular form of enslavement and nonsense, because they're still building, but they need us to be all of the finishing touches. And if we're not, they've got stairs to nowhere. And I'm for that.
And then in closing, I would just say, the censorship aspect of everything. Yes, of course, the digital ID, digital public infrastructure, you got the technology, you got policy. But yeah, moving forward as well, I'll just use climate change as one example. You're not even allowed to criticize climate change policies now, because that's disinformation, goes against information integrity. And so now with the B20 coming up, G20, and all those meetings and things, that's a big push, is this information integrity thing. And so if they can just do that with something with, if just talking about climate change, it could be anything else. So I'd be on the lookout for that.
Ian, you had spoke already, but would you like to give us some extra thoughts to finish? Or? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, do not comply, because the cost of not complying is much less than the cost of complying. We are now at the stage where complying with everything that is being erected around us is going to cost you and your family far more than not complying. sure, in the short term, if you don't comply, is it likely that this is going to cost you some short-term pain? Yeah, pretty much, because they are going to try and cut us off from systems. They're going to try and cut us off. Ultimately, they'll try and cut us off from finance. But so what? Because if you comply within a generation or so, the notion of what it is to be a sovereign human being will be a distant memory, because this is a total control and surveillance and control grid. It is total, and I don't think people have really grasped that yet. But that's what they are building.
Yeah, and I agree. I echo everything. You know, I think my final thought is, you know, we talked last show on the digital ID about discovering where your lines are individually, you know, because it's going to be personal and individual for everybody out there, where that line in the sand is for any one of these things: digital ID, face prints to go on Twitter, you know, not when it's confronted for you and you have to make choices about your every other thing, but now, and think about where those lines are. But, you know, my thought today is, you know, I'm of the mind, as I say often, that I think the majority of people, at varying degrees on varying topics, but are starting to question a lot. And I think we all see that, whether it's about Epstein or the things, there's a big shift happening. And I think what that seems to lack, or where that lacks within the population, is about this, you know, whether digital ID is just a thing that's convenience. You know, at least that's my experience. The people seem to really see a lot of things, but then might choose to continue to comply for the grid because they like their Starbucks or whatever. And I just think it really behooves us all, as individuals who largely seem to want to, you know, who speak to liberty and freedom, to think about what this actually represents in the long term, even the short term. After what we discussed here and 1,000 other points to where it goes, very rapidly you're going to start to see those things infringed on. And even if you think it's a partisan thing, what happens when the Democrats become in power, or Republicans again? You know, it will end up pushing you into a certain place based on the argument that the other is the problem. It always ends up that way. So just consider that. And I think we had a great conversation today, and I very much look forward to the next one. Thank you all for being here. And as always, everybody, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.